it is dangerous to take one step further and say, it could never happen here. That is irresponsible. You put all your creativity, your creative mind into seeing problems before they happen. And that's only going to happen if you say, I hope it never happens, but it could.
Welcome back, everyone. It is the beginning of November, and was thinking about an episode that we did 60 episodes back. In August of 2022, we had on Stephanie Maris, a corporate attorney, who kind of talked about the legal angle of protecting your business in terms of liability and protecting your students in the school. But as Nate and I were thinking about how to wrap the year up, we thought, well, we didn't really talk about the owner perspective. We touched on it in that episode, and I'll drop that episode in the show notes, but we didn't really talk about the owner perspective in depth. So today we're going to do this in a panel/roundtable format. And to do that, we brought on friend of the show, Greg Genter. He's a returning guest, and he's the driving force behind the Piano Express group piano curriculum. And Greg owns and operates 2 music schools in Northern Virginia. And he was one of the people that came to mind for me when I thought about doing this episode. And knowing him personally, I do know that he's put a lot of thought into child safety at his school. So in today's episode, we're going to get into how to protect your students, policies and procedures to put in place to create a safe environment, and how to prevent something tragic happening in your studio, obviously to the best of your ability. So Greg, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me
back. So I want to just jump into this first question. Greg, why is this such an important topic for you?
Yeah, well, obviously, you said it right. I'm not alone in the way I feel about child safety. We all care about it. Parents are dropping their children off at your studio and, they're trusting you to educate their children's minds. But there's also this unspoken thing. Okay, I'm going to go get groceries and I'm going to be back in an hour or a half hour or whatever. And you're going to keep my kid safe. You're going to return my child to me safe and sound when I come back to pick them up. Child safety is something that I think a lot of business owners are uncomfortable talking about. It's an uncomfortable topic, to think, well, what if a child at my studio is hurt, injured, even abused? It's something that if it's never happened at your studio, it's easy to believe that it can't happen. And so you don't want to think about it and you don't want to talk about it. If it has happened at your studio, you don't want to talk about it because you're like, oh, well, my business reputation. And so what if no one talks about this topic? Well, we could create a very, very unhealthy environment, an unsafe environment for the students. I think that this should be something, even if it's uncomfortable. I'm going to talk about this more. Leaders, people who are good leaders are the first in line to face uncomfortable realities. And so I feel like this is such an important thing to talk about top to bottom with the goal of prevention and, if need be, recovery.
Mm-hmm. Where would you say a good place to begin would be? Because that's some heavy stuff already. Where do you think we should start?
Right. Well, I want to talk first of all about mindset of the owner. Like what should your mindset be? Because I think that drives everything else. And from there, I want to talk about practical steps to take for prevention of injury, prevention of abuse. And at the end of this talk, I do want to talk about some ideas that I would have for business owners if you ever do find yourself in the middle of a triangle of an allegation of any kind. That's what I would like to do. So mindset, prevention, and then like what happens if things go wrong.
I do want to jump in and mention that Greg runs grouplessons.com. He's which is one of the sponsors of this show. So if you're looking for the world's best group curriculum and method, then look no further than the absolutely ingenious system that Greg has invented. And I know this is a little bit of a downshift from what we're just talking. We've kind of shifted there. But,
right.
The studio that Greg runs is where this kind of all incubated. And Piano Express from grouplessons.com is a very unique group method in that it does several things that no other group system in the world can do. It's a true multi-level system. It allows students to make individual progress in a group environment. And it has extensive teacher training that is included with the method and curriculum. And has an app that tracks student progress at home so you can see how much your students are actually practicing where they're getting stuck. And the app even supports students and allowing students to move forward in their books, even when they're not in the studio. And we have a lot of data that shows that most students are passing most of their music at home, which is really something that's nearly unheard of in our industry.
I'd love to dive into mindset, because I can say right now, Greg, that I have now adopted a mindset of this will happen. So how do we anticipate it?
Okay.
And of course, I agree with you wholly. None of us actually want to address it, because we're all working in an avoidance mindset. Like, this could never, ever happen. I mean, literally just yesterday, this wasn't a student, but a teacher. We had a teacher that fell, went to the emergency room, and now there's a workers' comp claim. And this is like child safety? No, this is teacher safety as well. We're talking about the well-being of your employees, staff, and your customers. So I love this mindset of just saying, hey guys, let's just own the fact that we're creating a safe environment. So now let's anticipate that there'll be issues and then move from there. So where do you start with mindset yourself, Greg?
I like to say, I hope nothing bad ever happens here. I hope my students are going to be safe, my staff. And we are going to talk about staff protection today, because you have to keep your staff safe. It is dangerous to take one step further and say, it could never happen here. That is irresponsible. And you're already opening the door for the irony is that can backfire. And if you don't have a keen eye to see, oh, this could go wrong. This could go wrong. I have this environment and there's this possibility that this could go wrong. You put all your creativity, your creative mind into seeing problems before they happen. And that's only going to happen if you say, I hope it never happens, but it could.
Nice.
Closing your mind and saying, oh, this is, again, uncomfortable to think about. It could never happen is not the mindset that I think we should have as business owners. This podcast is called the 7-Figure Music Studio, right? We are talking on most weeks, you guys are talking about how to build and how to grow. Today, we want to talk about how to prevent and possibly how to recover, because obviously growth trajectories don't go straight up. They dip, they go down, but how do you turn that down into a back up? And so I think that's really where we're going to be focusing today.
So Greg, practical steps, is this a good point at which to jump to that?
I would like to go to some practical steps. I want to talk about how to set up employee rules. I'm just going to rattle off a bunch of employee rules, and then rules for children, child rules, and then studio rules, kind of studio setup. And you guys, if there's anything that I've missed, Nate, of course, I'm sure you have lots of policies. If there's something that's on your list that's not on mine, it's a round table. But as far as employees, I would say, number one, get a handbook. Have your employees responsible to sign off on a handbook, and anything that you want your employees to understand. These are the grounds of keeping your employment status here in good standing. Here's the book. Do you want your staff to show up buzzed on alcohol? If the answer is no, put that in a handbook and make them sign it, because if not, they're like, I just had 2 beers before work. I'm fine. It's like, if there's nothing in writing, then there's no grounds. And so think about, what exactly do you want from your employees on every level, and create an employee handbook. There are good resources out there. You can just Google just basic templates for employee handbook. Copy it, read it, modify it, make it yours. You don't have to invent it from the ground up. I mean, that's a simple Google search, but I would say definitely start there. You need an official handbook.
I don't know if I would have thought, and I'm not in any way trying to be funny here, I don't think I would ever thought to put in an employee handbook the stipulation around substances. Just because in my mind, well, who would do that? Like, it's so out of the realm of possibility for me that I wouldn't even think to put it in there. But this is about thinking through all scenarios that could happen. So I'm really picking up on just, the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure angle of this. Nate, I wonder if you have anything that
I love your
would
comment, Daniel.
Yeah,
because I was like, I totally have no idea if that's in our manual, because I wouldn't have considered it as well. So I pulled it up, and I'm looking at, and there's a chapter entirely dedicated to employee conduct. There's a chapter dedicated to company property. Like, you can't take a box of pens
Right.
from BMF because we can't afford for you to do it. Because otherwise, we'll get it. But like, it's just so wise, Greg, because I promise you, we downloaded a template. We didn't even have a manual, an employee handbook, until like 5 or 6 years into BMF. Talk about I love your growth trajectory. It's not all up. There's dips where all of a sudden you're like, oh, we need a handbook. And so I'm sure we downloaded a template, and basically we update it every single year. As new instances arise, Daniel, to your point, where we were just like, whoa, we didn't realize we needed to put that in writing.
Right.
Do you feel comfortable sharing like one of those editions, Nate?
Yeah, I don't even need to read it. I can remember a couple that we put in within the last handful of years. Like simple things like timeliness, tardiness, exactly when you need to show up. Like, if the lesson's at 3, you can't show up at 3.
Right.
Even before Greg jumps back in, I would just say that, collectively I can hear the audience scrambling to find their handbook. And do we have anything in there about when they're supposed to show up? Like, this is like a good gut check for everyone listening. I'm even thinking about what might need to change around here. So yeah, I'll kick it back over to you, Greg.
Okay. So I am not a big believer in putting a bunch of ultra specific weird rules in your policies for parents and families. I know there's books out there. You can get at bookstores on weird state laws. I think states have had this thing. Oh, this really specific thing happened this one time, and we're going to make this weird law to prevent it from ever happening. I don't think you should do that on your policies. My personal thing, if you look at my website, thepianoexpress.com, and you look at our policies, it's all there. It's very simple. It fits on one page. Everything's common sense. Everything's pretty general. But for your staff handbook, you can get as specific as you want, because there's implications there. Like, if someone's going to lose their job, you don't want them to come back and say, well, I was wrongly let go of my job. They might, if there's any chance there's going to be litigation or blowback, you want to have it in writing in your handbook. So write a huge novel if you have to in your handbook and cover yourself. So that's one. You need an official handbook. My studio has a waiting room. My front desk person is answering the phone, answering emails, handling parents, questions with scheduling, and all that, policies, payments, taking payments, updating credit cards. That's, front desk. But the most important thing, and I tell my front desk people, the most important job that they have is to make sure that the kids walking in the door go out with their parents. Children are not allowed to leave the building without their parents. They can't say, oh, let me wait outside. My parents are going to be here in 10 minutes. No. That we have a parking lot. We have cars driving through. I'm not going to have kids out of sight. And so I train my front desk to manage drop off and pickup. Make sure that kids go home with their parents. If parents are divorced, I will let my staff know who those kids are, because I don't get into business, like with the family's personal business, but I don't know if there's a custody battle, but I do know that the number one, cause for kidnapping in the United States is not strangers, it's parents in custody battles. And so I don't go that far with my staff, but I just say, okay, hey, these parents are divorced. Just make sure when they're getting dropped off and picked up that everything looks happy and pleasant and there's no confusion. Okay. Like, if the kid's like, wait, I'm not supposed to be going home with you this week, I want the front desk to let me know if they're overhearing a conversation like that. So these are just steps that I take in training my staff.
Greg, can I add something to that?
Yes.
Because we have a intake form for all of our families. That's just a part of an automated email sequence. And one of the questions is the student allowed to leave on their own?
Mm.
And so the parents have to actually sign saying yes, they're allowed to leave, or no, they're not allowed to leave. The second thing I would add to that is I love this. We're hyper vigilant with who's leaving the building at BMF and whether or not they're leaving alone. But I would add this other piece. Every single human that comes in the door, we identify them by name when they arrive. It's like when you say their name out loud, then you recognize their presence in the building.
Yes.
And we have had instances over the years where there's a parent that comes in and says, "Hey, I'm here to pick up Henry," and I'll look to the front desk person, and they'll look at me like they don't know, they can't process who Henry is in that moment. And you're like, no, that is never ever allowed. Like, your number one rule, if you're working the front desk, is to know every human by name that's coming in and where they go. And we're a 9-classroom school. This is not a big building.
Right.
This is a small space, but so we can know all 45 or 50 people that are in the space at once.
Yes. Yes.
Especially if you have the
master schedule in front of your face on a desk, on your desktop computer. It's like, look at the names, match it up with the faces. Absolutely. Yeah. That's, it's so like knowing children's names is tied to child safety. I believe that. Go ahead.
100%.
And I'll take it a step further and say that if one wanted to be even more vigilant about this, the school that my son goes to has a card that parents have to fill out of every person that is allowed to take the child from the school. And it's on file with the school. And when I go to pick him up, I actually have to present a card made by the school.
Right.
To even be able to pick him up. So if I don't have the card, I have to go home, get it, and come back.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had a feeling like having this discussion with you guys, I was going to have to like take notes. I'm going to have to rewatch this and listen to what you guys say.
Wait. Greg, I had one other idea that I've always wanted to implement in the first 4 weeks at BMF, and we've never successfully done it. So maybe this is the year that, we're going to do it. But I've always wanted to have a name tag rule for the first 4 weeks, that every single student, and even parent, if you want to be so bold, but every student gets a name tag, boom, stuck on them for the first month of school, so that just everybody gets to know this name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Because I think it's so much deeper. You're absolutely right that the child's well-being is linked directly to if we know and recognize them, because our awareness increases and therefore our care, right?
Mm-hmm.
Increases. We're like, oh, I actually care about all these students, maybe not just my own, right? So anyways, back to you. Love it.
Yeah, we're still on employee rules. What's the next one, Greg?
Yeah, what do we got?
Here's some basic ones. Employees can never be alone in a room with a child unless there is a 24/7 constantly monitoring and recording security camera. I won't put I'm at the place in my business where we've grown to the point where I hire other teachers, and even when I'm alone in a building or in a room with a child, I don't want to be in a room without a camera. I feel like the camera keeps me safe. And if there's no camera, then I will not schedule a class or a one-on-one lesson with a staff and a child. All employees that work here at the Piano Express are required to fill out and comply with a criminal background check before they're hired. And I will say, it took me a few years to pull, like I had in my head when I was a new business owner, this is something I should do. But every time I tried to research, like, where's the company I got confused. Okay. Like I didn't know who to call. I didn't know who the people were. So here's the thing. Everyone listening to this podcast, we are going to put a link to the people that I found because they are so good. They're called Youth Protect Sports because they work mostly with sports teams, with children on sports teams. But when they found out I was in music school, they're just like, we've worked with so many music schools. We were not their first music school, but they have the word sports in their name because that's their biggest slice of pie. But they've been so good and so easy to work with. They made everything clear. So if you do not have a criminal background check filter for all of your staff to go through, click on the link that is going to be provided here and get in touch with Roxanne. She's my lady at this company, and you guys will be better protected.
Greg, we just a quick chime in there. We do the same, just like you. It took us years before we started doing it for every hire, mostly because probably like a lot of our listeners, like our initial employees were a whole bunch of friends of mine. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're not criminals or have no background.
Right.
But anyways, as we grew, we matured as a business. And I think it costs like $100 a report or something like that. So just for those of you that are listening or trying to figure out what the actual cost, and Greg, I don't know what yours costs, but we spent about a penny.
Call my person.
Wait, I'm clicking
person.
on
You
your
save a lot of money.
Okay, good. So we're not putting the BMF link in the show notes. We're only putting Roxanne's link. So we don't put cameras in the classrooms, and we've gone back and forth on this for years.
Okay.
And I'm just saying that out loud. So if some people are listening and being like, I need to install a system, understand that like we don't do it and we see thousands of students a year in our program. And
right.
I'm just saying we've chosen not to because we've weighed the pros and cons of whether teachers are comfortable with it, et cetera. And we decided not to. I'm not saying we wouldn't. I've always wanted to do it because I'm such a huge proponent of capturing content and helping us level up our product and like for training purposes, but we don't do it. But we do have cameras in our, we've had them in the community spaces.
Right.
So,
yes.
Anyways, I just wanted to share that.
Everything we're sharing at this round table, none of it has been etched in tablets of stone. We're just sharing ideas, and there's no perfect right or wrong. These are just ideas. And I think that the best way to listen to this episode is to just cherry pick and say, okay, this one's for me. This one's probably not for me. And that's fine. As long as you are building the safest space that makes sense for your studio and your community. Yeah.
Totally.
Yep. So the wrapping up employee rules. Employees physically touching children. Okay. How does that work? If a child's hand position is just one note off, can a teacher just pick up their hand and move their hand, rather than just point and say, you need to move down one, and the student moves the wrong hand or moves the wrong direction. I mean, you can waste a lot of time. Time is precious in a class. It's like, I just want to grab this kid's hand and move it. We ask our staff to always ask permission. Okay. And so the way it will work is in class, I'll say, your hand needs moved down a note. Can I just move your hand for you? And the student will either nod their head yes or shake their head no. And if they shake their head no, I'm going to respect that. I'll say, okay, well, then you have to move down a step. And so you just ask before you touch. That is a policy at my studio. You do not just touch children. Physical contact.
I want to jump in there for just a second and just say that I was so fastidious about this that it actually changed how I taught. I got good at using really specific language so that I could get a child to have a physical movement in their hand without me having to touch their hand. So getting into the mind of a 6-year-old and helping them to manipulate their hand without me physically touching their hand, it took a lot of thought on my part to know how to use words to cause those things, because I just tried to avoid physical contact as much as possible. It became more challenging as students got into higher levels of artistry in intermediate and advanced music. And at that point, I did ask for permission, especially as those kids were also getting a lot of times into the teen years. And then that just gets weird. But it's very, very different from one of the Brazilian teachers I had that would just smack my arms, in college, but yeah, those days are long gone. So anyway, Greg,
well, there's real benefit to taking these words to heart because you can level up your teaching craft.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, asking a student to observe my hand and see what the difference is between her hand and my hand is a much deeper lesson than even than moving their hand.
Yeah,
to your point, Daniel.
Win the quick battle, but lose the war. Sure.
Yeah, exactly, totally. So, and that's just, you're so dead on, Daniel, too, with this idea is that as they age, your relationship with the student changes, and like speaking to Greg's language, you get permission, and things like body awareness. It becomes a totally different sport as they're leveling up in terms of having to get them become much more aware of their body. And a lot of times touching a shoulder, things like that are huge releases for them to become aware. Mm-hmm. And so you need to have that permission, but yeah, it's a really good point.
You don't know what's going on with a student. You just don't. And so you have to respect the space. And I can just think back to students that the body language they gave off was just very open. You could tell they felt comfortable. But then I know students that, I don't know if they were just shy or introverted, or maybe they're just having a bad day, but you could just read the body language and know that they were not as comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to rely on my read of someone. That's why you ask. Yeah. And this goes
back to Greg.
This goes, I'm very aware. This is three guys talking here, but I think this goes no matter if you're guy, gal, like whatever. I think it's just a matter of respect versus, I'll just leave it at that. So anyway.
Yep. So the last thing that I have on with employees is and I'm gonna be honest, this one I'm behind schedule with, okay, but I want my employees to complete a CPR certification course, and I provide the scheduling, and I as the employee will pay for that. So again, like what happens if a student's choking and none of my staff know the Heimlich maneuver? Well, obviously that's a huge preventable thing, and so I want my staff to have basic CPR. I have a place in town that will offer the course several times a year for anyone that works with children, and so doing this episode, I'm reminding myself, it's like I got to schedule that because some of my staff are behind in that. But that is a great thing to have.
We do it, Greg, but we only require one person on site to have it.
Okay.
So that's but it's cool to see that that's on your list. I like how you've leveled it up to everybody so that you've got a backup to your backup to your backup.
Right. Yeah. I always worry, like if someone like calls in sick and I have to call a sub, I just want to make sure that the sub is just as ready for an emergency as the plan A person.
And I will point out that Greg has a lot fewer people on site because of their class, because they're just primarily group piano and they're seeing so many kids at once.
I think it's like $45. Again, here I am like the dollar. I'm like the dollar police.
That's all right.
You're going to tell me that it's like $10 where you are.
No. The government provides it as a free service here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
Yeah,
I'm joking. I'm moving to Virginia.
Yeah.
It's not bad.
Okay, anyways, just for those that are tabulating the cost, to Daniel's point.
It's affordable, and it's like no matter what the dollars is, when we're dealing with safety, you just fork the bill and make it pretty safe.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's okay, I want to turn my attention from what I expect from employees to what I expect from my students, because the number one person that is going to keep a child safe is the child. The child has to basically follow some basic rules and keep themselves from getting, especially when it comes to injury. So absolutely no running. in my building. Like
Yes.
we have a summer camp and we have kids that want to play tag and hide and go seek. And I have to be like the old uncool bad guy and be like, you can't run in the building. No running in the building. I mean, our pianos are not wrapped in foam, bubble wrap. They have hard corners. If you fall and hit, you're going to get stitches. And so we have no running.
That's a hard rule to enforce. We are training to that in our community room, especially in the halls.
Yeah.
Just saying it out loud. If you're like, no running, of course you should have no running. Just understand that you're going to be using that language often, or your desk person is going to be using that language.
Yes.
And we actually, Greg, you have to train the parents too.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be like, parents, we need this child's can't be running.
Right. And if I have, like, I've had to get down on eye level with a 12-year-old, and it's like, I'm 12 years old. I'm not going to run into a piano. I'm not going to fall over. And it's like, yeah, but the 5-year-olds are watching you run. And
right,
if the 5-year-old is going to get hurt because you're making stupid decisions, if you're 12, if you think you're old enough to run, then you're old enough to hear the word stupid come out of my mouth.
I'm putting that in the promotional material.
So I'm just going to quickly go through the rest of my child rules, because a lot of these child rules are just a reflection of employee rules. So children should never be alone in a room with a teacher. I want the teacher to know that, but I also want the student to know that. Okay. I want the student to know that something is wrong if they're in a room alone with the teacher. Obviously, if God forbid, if we ever hire someone who is a perpetrator of abuse, they're not going to tell the student, oh, hey, this is a rule. I want the children to know the rules too, and so that's something I communicate to both staff and children.
Wait, what about in private lesson?
We do cameras, and we also have, like, this is a private lesson room. If you're watching this on video, we have this big window in the door,
right? Totally.
So people walking by can see. So.
In the most high traffic area in the studio. That's the most high traffic area in the studio.
This is the hallway, yeah. And so people are always walking by. And so, yeah, we have a camera and a window. And so, yeah, that's our thing, because we do have private lessons, but I don't want a staff and a child to be alone in a room out of view.
There you go. Okay, dig it.
So, then drop off pickup, I communicate that same rule to children. You can't wait outside. You have to stay in the building until someone picks you up. And one thing that I have about being potty trained, because we have children that are so young they're not potty trained. A parent absolutely must stay at the studio if their child is not potty trained. We are not going to have a staff take a child to the bathroom. I'll have a child pee their pants if the parents go out and get groceries if the child's not potty trained. I'm just like, sorry, we're not doing this. So that's another rule. I guess that's children, but we also communicate that to parents of very young students. And that wraps up our child rules. I also want to go quickly through just a couple things that we have for our studio itself, the way we set up our studio. Our studio carries liability insurance. If you have a studio that's bigger than you, even if it's you teaching private lessons in your own house, you should be an LLC and you should have liability insurance. It's
agreed.
It costs some money, 100%. But it definitely protects you from the costs that would come if there was ever any kind of litigation against your studio. So
I'll just add in there that a multi-million-dollar liability policy is usually only a couple $100 a year. Yeah. So there's no reason not to carry it. Keep going, Greg.
Yes, absolutely. Constantly communicate these safety rules. Whatever rules you have, you need as an owner to constantly be communicating. I think Nate touched on this already. You can't just post it on the wall and let it kind of disappear on the wall. You need to constantly, as things come up, if you see children run, you need to say, hey, remember, there's no running in the building. If you see something that is out of policy, if there is a front desk person with their nose in their phone, scrolling on social media while people are coming in and out of the door, I will say, get off your phone and watch these kids, keep them safe, so constantly reinforce the environment that you need. If you're the leader, if you're the owner, you're the owner of the environment, not just the physical building, not just the numbers. You're the owner of the atmosphere. And so you constantly have to be communicating what you want. Again, security cameras, that's my preference. I have that as part of my setup. I have a first aid kit in our kitchenette area. So if we ever need Band-Aid, first aid cream, whatever, we have that ready. And then the last thing I'll say about the studio is we completely childproof it. Okay.
Totally.
If you're not a parent yet, you've never had to childproof your house, you probably need to Google how to childproof a room,
right?
Because there's things you're not going to think about: covering, electrical outlets, just making sure that sharp corners are not like right in the middle so that people are going to walk into them. Just Google basics on childproofing spaces and follow that. But one for me, piano benches. I strongly prefer piano benches that do not open and close. We had a couple benches that came with the pianos that do have the hinges and the lids. Those are little traps for fingers. I have duct taped them shut in the past,
totally.
Just so they won't open. If we have any benches that will open, I always turn the opening away from where the students sit. So the hinges are the closest to the piano and the opening is behind them. That way, if they grab the front of the bench and scoot the bench, they're not going to flip it open and then sit on their fingers. I think those of us that have been around opening and closing piano benches enough, you know that. So be careful with piano benches. I would recommend you just glue them shut. Figure, it's a nice place to store books if you have a very small studio, but I'd say store them on your bookshelf and close the bench for good.
Wait, can I just jump in here and go back to your childproofing comment? So a lot of our listeners won't have kids. And you're absolutely right. They won't even really know what they have to do from the list of childproofing. But I want to just offer a perspective. So for me, like electrical outlets, like I come from the world of, recording studios, touring, etc. So power is everywhere. And when I set up a band classroom, which a lot of our listeners will have, I want outlets everywhere, right? Because I'm thinking about being able to have gear set up into the ideal teaching environment, rehearsing environment, songwriting environment. And yet I have to trust when someone says, okay, we can do this, but we need to run all cables along the walls. We need to make everything hidden so kids aren't going to start reaching for a power strip, etc. And the just simple little plastic things, as annoying as they are that are in the outlets, need to go there. The reason why I say all this is because if you're listening back to your comment, Greg, about where to cherry pick and what to use and what not to use, there are certain pieces here you should absolutely cherry pick.
Yes.
And one of them is, if you have children in your studio, ages 6 to, say, 11, then don't skip this piece.
Yeah.
Even if it's annoying to you.
Yeah.
Because it was annoying to me.
Yeah. If you're not using an outlet, you need to cover it up. You need.
So it's basic, simple things, but take this piece and shift your mind, because that's the purpose of this whole episode, is to move your mind towards a more safe environment that you own. Okay, onward, Greg.
Okay. Well, I'm going to turn a corner, and we've talked so far about prevention. What happens if you find yourself in the middle of an allegation? What happens if your business suddenly, you had plans to go up, 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 and now it looks like things are about to take a hard turn down and you're going to have to go into recovery mode? What do you do? And for this part of our talk, I'm going to be a little bit open. I have run my studio for 13 years. And when I opened the studio, I had this is never going to happen to me mindset. And we did have, in our 13 years, we've had one incident where there was a report of abuse and law enforcement did get involved. And so I'm speaking from some experience. I'm going to assure my listeners there's going to be no graphic details, so if this is a sensitive issue for you, you can keep listening. I'm going to respect that. But I do want you to know that I'm coming from a place, unfortunately, of experience. I would say in my 13 years of running a studio, the two most stressful things that I've had to go through was the COVID shutdown and then this incident here that I'm going to talk about. It was not fun to get into. It was not fun to go through, and it didn't have a happy ending either. If you find yourself in the middle of this, it's not going to be a Disney movie. It's not going to have a happy ending. It's probably going to end with a bunch of people taking sides with lawyers, and no one's allowed to talk to each other. You're not even allowed to say, I'm sorry this happened. It's just people disappear and go away, and you're just kind of left with nothing to do but think, how am I going to move forward and have a safer space? And so part of, Daniel, one of the reasons why you said, why is this such a passion of mine, is because I've been hurt. And so I will say, if a parent or a child ever comes to you and says, something happened to me, and they describe a situation that sounds abusive, it is very important to do two things right away. Number one, do not take sides. You have to listen and you don't take sides. And number two, you have to report everything you hear to Child Protective Services. You have to go to law enforcement. These are two things that I didn't know. I heard what happened in my studio is I had an angry parent come to me and say, my child's describing something that's happened to them at a few of their lessons a couple times. And I didn't want to believe it because I knew the staff person. I wanted to side with my staff. Okay. I just said, don't take sides. But of course it's natural. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. It's natural for studio owners to want to side with the staff. It's like, oh no. Okay. If a child says this happened and a staff says, no, this didn't happen, someone's lying and someone is telling the truth. And you want to hope that the staff is telling the truth. Because if the staff is telling the truth, then you don't have a problem. But if the child's telling the truth, then you do. And so it's really easy to take sides, but I'm telling you, you can't. You have to listen objectively. I had the parent of the staff person corner me and say, how could you even think there's even 1% that my child could do this to another child? And I didn't know what to say, but looking back, I should have just said, I have to be objective right now. I can't take sides, but I didn't know to say that then. Like if I could go back and say, knowing now,
right.
You can't afford to take sides because it compromises very important conversations that you're going to have in the near future. Okay. Reporting everything to CPS. I didn't know I was supposed to do that too. I'm lucky that in my network, I have, one of my wife's best friends is a family counselor. And so we asked her, we were like, what are we supposed to do? And she says, you have to report this. You call and you are like a parakeet. You are like an amplifier. You just plug in and you say what has been said to you. You say it on the phone to this person on the other end. And I thought, this is a little overboard. It's like, okay, well, I don't even know if this is true. And she said, it's not your job to figure out what's true. It's your job to report. And so, I'm thinking all these things. Why doesn't the parent report it? Why do I have to be in the middle of this? Why am I so I pick up the phone.
Right.
I do what the person told me to do. Okay. And I was under the understanding that within 2 or 3 weeks, I might get, or I might not get a call back from Child Protective Services to just follow up. Okay. And so I was nervous. I was like, okay, I got to wait 2 or 3 weeks and my stomach's in a knot. It's like, how is this going to resolve? Yeah. I already told the staff person that they can't continue work while there's this angry parent that probably wants to strangle them. So they're out of a job. And I thought it might be unfair. They're out of a job. What happened next was a surprise for me. I didn't have to wait 2 weeks. I got a visit 2 days later, not from Child Protective Services, but from a private detective in the police force who informed me that my studio, unbeknownst to me, was already under investigation because this was not the first claim from this staff person. They were already investigating another claim from another student. And so had I not made that call, this person might have continued at our studio, or at least the investigation process would have gotten drawn out a lot more. And so I learned really quick that these rules and these protocols are there for a reason. Okay. So let me reiterate. Number 1, don't take sides. Number 2, report everything you hear to Child Protective Services. It's not easy. It's not fun, but it's important. Okay.
Can you talk about that meeting with the detective in terms of just, first of all, what was your, like, just as an owner, what was your emotional reaction to that in that moment? And then secondly, how did you actually move forward without just a mind that was freaking out? If it's even possible. Could you just share from the perspective of your own, just as an owner, trying to do the right thing in every instance?
So I was, as I came to understand a clearer picture of what was really happening, I was grieved that my studio, is a place where, I want it to be a place where children come and learn and they're safe, and the fact that it wasn't my fault, but it's like it happened here. And it was just it was grief, I think. And there's no way around it. But I think that one of the shocking things to me was how I could see that this law enforcement person, it was this person's job to just, they've been through this conversation 1,000 times, and it was my first time. And this person was just so conditioned to face pushback from business owners. And this law enforcement agent kept saying, I'm really surprised at how much you care about your students. I mean, we see a lot of business owners just trying to protect their business. And I was just, I couldn't believe that. I'm just like, in a situation like this where people are hurting, it's like you want to really focus on the people first. I'll worry about my business later. And I think that was one of the things that helped law enforcement trust me. I think that here's a big backfire. This is a little bit of irony. If you ever do have to talk to law enforcement, if you become overly protective of your business and you start unfairly siding with your employees, law enforcement's going to pick that up. They've seen that 1,000 times. They're going to not trust you. And now you're not for them, you're against them. Law enforcement can very quickly turn sour on your business, and things can get very bad because you wanted to protect your business. So be careful. There's a little bit of irony. If you can just let go and really focus on the people, focus on really what matters, then you're actually keeping your business as safe as can be.
Before you go forward, Greg, I do just want to point out, and this might have gotten lost in the subtext, but this accusation has happened, that this team member that was the subject of this investigation, they had gone through a background check. So Greg had done all of the things that he's saying here, and this still happened. This is why at the outset we're saying, like, you can't go into this mindset that it can't happen here, even with the precautions in place.
Right.
Something like this can happen. Again, not trying to be fatalistic, pessimistic, that sort of thing. This is about having a wake-up call. This is about knowing what you need to do in a situation like this if it were to happen. So anyway, keep going, Greg.
Right. If law enforcement ever does get involved, and if you get in the middle, okay, if you ever have to talk to law enforcement, I will say 2 things. Number 1, tell the truth to law enforcement, okay? All the way down to the details. If you're taking sides, it's really easy to say the details in one way when you're talking to this side and another way when you can't. You have to stay objective, because if you end up bending, twisting, breaking the truth in a criminal investigation, then you are now part of the criminal. You're part of the crime. And so it's very important to just measure your words. And I will say this, if you know who the family is that has brought allegations against your staff, and if you believe that there is any chance that there's going to be repercussions against your studio, then you should not talk to a law enforcement agent without the presence of a lawyer. Okay? Now, I said already, you don't want to be overprotective of your business, but you also have to be smart. Okay? If part of the law enforcement's job is to build a case against your studio, they know what questions to ask and they know what to draw out of you. And you don't know what you're supposed to say and not supposed to say. And you might say the wrong thing, and all of a sudden there's things that can be used in a case against your studio. A lawyer knows what you're supposed to say and not say. And so if you're not sure where these allegations are coming from, respectfully agree to meet. Like if a law enforcement knocks on your door and says, "Hey, we need to talk," just say, "Great, I want to talk to you. I want to set up a time, and I wanted to just be in the presence of my lawyer just to keep me safe." And that's a good smart move.
I want to jump in on this and say that in the show notes, I'm going to put a video that I saw probably 10 years ago. It is this video left such an impression on me. It's by a professor at one of the Ivy League law schools. Can't remember which one at this time. But he is addressing a class of young law students. And it is a 45-minute lecture on why your client should never talk to the police. And he's actually quite witty. He's actually very engaging. I've actually watched this video on more than one occasion just because you really get a look inside the legal process. And he talks about one of the first things he addresses, especially if they plan to tell the truth, they should not talk to the police. And then he spends 45 minutes explaining how the legal system is set up to trap even innocent people. And I'm just going to leave that in the show notes. It's very much worth a watch. Keep going, Greg.
I think maybe I got lucky because I never had a lawyer behind my back as a business owner. I just, I wasn't really even all that involved. I had 1-2 conversations. These 2 pieces of advice will stand.
100%.
Don't take sides. Do tell the truth. And then watch Daniel's video, because maybe like not talking to the police without a lawyer is probably a smart move. Like looking back, I can say I probably just didn't know any better, and I probably put myself in a precarious situation. We opened up with mindset, and so if it's okay, I want to close this talk with mindset of recovery. If you are unfortunately put in a situation where this is your only path forward, you're hitting a setback, and you're going to have to face recovery. People don't want to talk about abuse. I'll tell you what, this conversation that we were having today in a lot of ways is uncomfortable for me. And even with the listeners there, there's this fear that I have. It's like, oh no, well, his studio is not just a place where you learn music. It's also a crime scene, And so what about my reputation? What about what everyone thinks of, my community thinks about me, and so it's very tempting for me to just get quiet and sweep this under the rug and pretend it never happened. But I passionately care about the safety of children. And I think it's important for us as business owners to be free to talk to each other and say, here's what I've learned. You can take some of the things that I've learned, and maybe your studio can be a little safer. And so I'm willing to put even my studio in a precarious place to spread awareness and maybe some better safety measures. A lot of you, I'm sure maybe all of you have heard people say, my business is my baby, right? My business is my baby. And it feels like a baby sometimes, but it is not an actual baby. There is no blood going through the veins of this building. And it's not a person. It doesn't have feelings. Whenever people are hurt, it's important to focus on the people. It's important not to get overly protective of your business. It's not the right time. If you want your business to be able to survive a setback and recover, think about how you built your business in the first place. Okay. If you're running a successful business, there is no way, I don't care how good your ads campaign is. I don't care how good your personality is or how good of a musician you are. You cannot build without a successful service, a passionate service, a great service to the public, right? You're caring for people and meeting their needs. So if someone's hurt, focus on the people, take time and make sure the people are okay to the best of your ability. And don't worry about the business. That is my advice as far as mindset. If you hit this kind of setback, if you do, then you are the kind of leader that can face uncomfortable things. You can survive. You can get through. You can recover.
Greg, did you weren't, I think you said you weren't going to reveal the outcome, but you sort of did in a way. You seem to be in a optimistic and disciplined place now. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes. Yeah. I think there's a lot of live and learn. I think that when things are very hard and very like when you have to struggle and when things are stressful, painful, you learn fast. And yeah, I think that I was put in a situation where I was set back. We did lose multiple families from my studio.
Yes.
It was very stressful for me. It was a huge distraction from everything that I wanted to get done in that quarter. Instead, I had to deal with this thing that just landed in my lap. But I will say, on the other end of recovery, I'm stronger than I ever was. And I think that is what problems can do. If there's any glasses half full to setbacks and challenges and problems, even big ones, is you can come out stronger on the other side.